What a blooming good question. Welcome to a session talking about Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a mechanism by which you can write not necessarily better questions, but questions that will speak more directly to the types of cognitive learning you want your students to experience. Bloom's taxonomy is actually three distinct areas. There's the cognitive domain, which is the intellectual, knowledge, thinking kinds of learning. Affective domain, which is our feelings, and psychomotor domains. These are the manual skills, physical skills. Bloom's taxonomy has been around since the 1950s and was put together by Benjamin Bloom and some of his colleagues. Over the years, some folks have come up with a revised taxonomy. On this particular chart, you will see the original taxonomy, which was knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. In the revised taxonomy, you have remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Again, the higher order thinking skills that are part of Bloom's taxonomy really begin with the analysis section. So let's talk about this and how it might apply to teaching. Really, this is about making sure that your students are not just memorizing and putting things back out for you to look at, but they're actually incorporating it and understanding it, comprehending it, and putting it into new types of learning environments. So this goes to the question of what should you test for. If you want to see that kind of learning happening, if that's some of your course objectives, is those critical thinking skills, how should you test it? Well, first of all, make sure that what you're testing is an important educational objective. I've never been one to test some obscure fact out of a textbook because I don't care if my students remember that or not. Make sure you're testing content, the actual content that you've gone over in class, so that you've had them read or write papers on or apply in some unique way. You should test understanding and their ability to apply the principles that they've learned. Again, I think you should be testing critical thinking or higher order skills. And finally, you can test for relevant facts and principles, but specifically how they integrate them to solve complex problems. One of the things that I think is really important is if you don't teach it, then don't test for it. I had that conversation recently with some faculty in a discipline I will not name, and they were talking about they had a series of questions in a test that were logic based. In order for the students to understand it, they had to understand logic sequencing, and this was not a discipline that taught logic. And so I asked them that question. I said, really, you teach logic in your class? And they said, well, no, but they should have had it by now. Well, my point is, if you don't teach the concept, then by all means don't test on it. So let's look specifically at Bloom's taxonomy. This is the lowest, the bottom level of the taxonomy itself. And I want to make sure we understand in talking about Bloom's that we're not talking about easy. Knowledge questions can be quite difficult. If you ask me to recite the Gettysburg Address from remembering it, that's a very hard question. That would be something that would be hard. I would struggle with memorizing that. So it can be hard, but it still is just remembering something. It doesn't ask you to apply it or to synthesize it or those critical thinking skills. So a knowledge question will begin with who, what, when, where, how. We'll use words like describe, define, identify. An example of this kind of question would be list the steps involved in. So that would be a knowledge or remembering kind of question. They don't have to know why the steps are in that order or those kind of things. They just know how to remember and list them. The next level up would be comprehension, understanding. Again, this is interpreting, translating from one medium to another, and describing in your own words. So you would start these questions with words like convert or defend, distinguish, estimate, explain. A good example of this kind of question would be summarize the basic tenets of deconstructionism. Again, they're stating things, they've got a level of comprehension that they're not just regurgitating what they've heard in class. Application or applying, these are solving problems, applying concepts and principles to new situations. You would use words like demonstrate, modify, operate, prepare. An example of this would be calculate the deflection of a beam under uniform loading. So again, you're asked to do it in an application way. Analyzing or analysis, this is getting much further into the higher order thinking skills. These are things that points out, differentiates, distinguishes, discriminates, or compares. Again, you would use words like diagram, illustrate, infer. Obviously, that's a very higher order critical thinking skill to be able to infer something, select, separate, subdivide. An example of this, this is a good example since we just recently had the State of the Union address. In the President's address given above, which statements are based on facts and which are assumptions? So it's the ability of the student to read through something like that and be able to analyze those kinds of differences. The next one is synthesis or evaluating. Again, this is creating, designing, planning, organizing, generating, writing. You might start your question with words like categorize, combine, or compile. An example of this kind of question would be, how would you restructure the school day to reflect children's developmental needs? A student answering this question is going to have to pull from many different things they've learned, probably in other classes. So they'd have to understand the wakefulness and sleep cycle of children. They'd have to understand how often do you need to change topics. They need to understand are children better in the morning or the afternoon, all those kinds of things to better fit children's needs. Finally, we have evaluation or creating. This is judging and assessing. You would use words like appraise, compare, conclude, contrast, criticize, discriminate, explain. An example of this type of question would be, why is Bach's Mass in B minor acknowledged as a classic? Again, this takes a greater body of knowledge to be able to answer that question and make sure you're able to synthesize and evaluate all the different components that you've learned about music to apply it to Bach's Mass in B minor. So thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, why don't you create at least one question stem for each of at least 3 of Bloom's taxonomy. Maybe it could be knowledge base, it could be application, maybe it's synthesis. But take a minute now and create one of those questions. It's going to be part of your homework assignment as we move forward looking at Bloom's taxonomy. If you need more information, I have lots of resources here in the office. We're willing to help you anytime. My email address is listed here, sbear13@jcc.edu, or you can give me a call at 7607. I think you'll find Bloom's taxonomy as a good tool that you can use in moving forward with test construction.